Welcome to Gamecock Pod Live.
For the next 3 to 4 years, I'll be committed to the University of Gamecock.
This is Rodgers again to the 25, 20, 15, 10. Rodgers scores! Jackie Bradley Jr. delivered for the Gamecocks. Lost it up, looking for Kelly. Touchdown! Can you believe it?
And South Carolina is sending shockwaves through the SEC.
Frederick plays it in at the buzzer. That's a win! Unbelievable! I don't believe it!
And now, live from Studio 54 of the Gamecock Pod Studios, here's the Cockfather himself, Keith Alsep.
All right, everybody, welcome in to Gamecock Pod Live on Wednesday, August 21st, 2024. And do we have a show for you? Coming up in just a few minutes, we will go in depth on Gamecock football in about a 45-minute conversation with 24/7 Sports National College Football writer Brad Crawford. We'll talk about Lenora Sellers, the offensive and defensive lines, the linebacker room, the secondary, wide receivers, tight ends, running backs, special teams. We're going to break it all down for you today on Gamecock Pod Live. So evidently there was a glitch. Generally when I schedule on Central Time. Today, I guess it was scheduled on Eastern Time, so we're starting an hour sooner than the YouTube link. So hopefully everybody is with us. Let's get into our Nana's Porch countdown to kickoff, brought to you by the award-winning full-service catering company servicing the greater Charlotte, Fort Mill, Rock Hill, Lancaster area. Of course, I'm talking about Nana's Porch, your go-to for all your catering needs, whether it's a banquet, a wedding, a corporate event, or the big backyard bash with the whole hog barbecue. Nana's Porch has got you covered. Maybe you're hosting a watch party and you just don't feel like spending all evening on Friday because you're going to a high school game. You don't want to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and cook for everybody. Call Nana's Porch. Maybe they can prepare a big spread for you and drop it off, or you can go by and pick it up. And by the way, make sure you get several tubs of the award-winning pimento cheese, which today they go for the three-peat on being ranked number 1 and number 2 in the meat and cheese category by the North Carolina Specialty Foods Association. Smoky jalapeno number 1 and the great regular flavor number 2 for the last 2 years. This year, they're going for the three-peat. They'll find out later today. Get in touch with my good friend Chris Payne and support this Gamecock-owned and operated business by going to nanasporch.com. That's NANASPORCH.com. You'll love it. I guarantee it. All right, so on Gamecock Pod Daily, we've been counting down to kick off with players' numbers. Today we are 10 days away from kickoff, and the two greatest players, I can't count Gary Harper. Okay, he wore number 10. he turned and handed the ball off to George Rogers, and when he threw it, usually good things didn't happen. Although he did throw a touchdown pass in the 13-9 win over Clemson in 1979 to Ben Cornett, the other tight end. The big tight end was Willie Scott. So we went back. Let's go back to 14. Connor Shaw, what can you say about him? The winningest quarterback in school history. Never lost a game at Williams-Brice Stadium as a starter. 13, we went with Shi Smith and Sabell Newton. 12, Tommy Suggs and Jeff Grants. My first memories of Carolina football is Jeff Grants, a 5'10" sophomore from Bel Air, Maryland, who was not just a great quarterback. And remember, back then, you didn't play until you were a sophomore. Freshman, you played on the freshman team. But that was the night I fell in love with Carolina football. Was Jeff Grant's first game in 1973, and the Gamecocks upset Georgia Tech in Williams-Brice Stadium. And of course, more famously, Grants threw 5 touchdown passes and accounted for all 8 touchdowns in the 56-20 win over Clemson. And he did throw a 6th touchdown pass on 4th down late in the game. Jim Carlin in his first year was sending a message. But Jay Saldy, the tight end who played several years, was drafted by the Dallas Cowboys, played for them in the National Football League. I think was even a starter on 1 or 2 Super Bowl teams. He got called for offensive pass interference on 4th down, and so it was loss of down and change of possession. But Tommy Suggs never lost to Clemson, okay? And he was just out of college. He joined Bob Fulton in the booth, and they made magic for all of us cats that are 60 and over. We grew up listening to the games every Saturday on a radio station in the upstate. For me, WELP 104.9 in Easley, they carried the games because they weren't all on TV. Maybe you got 1 or 2 games a year on TV. And so I grew up listening to Tommy Suggs, but Tommy Suggs also threw 5 touchdown passes in a game against Virginia in a huge comeback win. And Tommy Suggs never lost to Clemson. He beat them when he was a freshman on the freshman team. He beat them 3 years in a row as the starting quarterback for the Gamecocks. And he's the only Gamecock quarterback to lead his team to a conference championship. And that was in 1969 when South Carolina won the ACC. He is an all-time great. He's been extremely successful in business. Jeff Grants stayed in Columbia as a great player that played on the not on only just the football team. His 2 years at 73 and 75, he led Carolina to 7-win seasons. And he was injured in 74, and Carolina did not fare very well in his absence. But he's probably retired by now, but for many, many years, he was a corporate executive with Budweiser in Columbia. Tommy Suggs has his own business and has been an extremely successful businessman. So I call out those 2 guys because those are all-time greats, and maybe 30 years from now, 40 years from now, people will be talking about Connor Shaw in that same light. Yesterday was 11. It was bittersweet. Kenny McKinley and Pharaoh Cooper were our number 11s. Today, it's Co Simpson and Sky Moore. Co Simpson was a lightly recruited safety out of Rock Hill High School. I remember talking to Jim Ringer at the Shrine Bowl, and South Carolina was going to take a flyer on him, but then they weren't going to bring him in. They were going to gray shirt him and bring him in the following January. That turned out to be a very poor decision. Jim Ringer, he went on and on about Co Simpson, not just as a safety, but a guy that had the softest pair of hands he had ever seen in Rock Hill. And trust me, there were a ton of great players that had come out of the Rock Hill area before Stephon Gilmore did and before Jadeveon Clowney did. Okay, and some of them played at Carolina, and others went to Notre Dame and Ohio State and places like that. Okay, said Coach Simpson had the softest pair of hands. When he caught a ball, it never made a sound. He had such soft hands. And so he came in, and he was supposed to come in 2000, I guess 2003, but he came in 2004, and he was immediately a stud. In his freshman season, 50 solo tackles, 11 assisted tackles, 6 interceptions. Against Georgia in just his second game, he intercepted a David Green pass and returned it 57 yards for a touchdown. I was at that game with my good friend Marty Lambert, and we were going nuts. He was the SEC Defensive Player of the Week for his performance in the Gamecocks win over Arkansas, which included a fumble return, 57 yards for a touchdown. He led the SEC in interceptions as a true freshman with 6. He was the SEC Freshman of the Year. He was the first South Carolina player ever to win that award. And then his sophomore year, he had 103 tackles, 2 fumble returns, and an interception. He was consensus first team All-SEC and was first team All-American by the Football Writers Association of America. And I'm pretty sure that one interception Co Simpson had was in that 2005 Tennessee game to seal the win for South Carolina on Rocky Top with Peyton Manning in the building. And then he said, peace out. I'm 3 years out of high school. I'm going to the draft. And he was picked in the 4th round of the 2006 draft by the Buffalo Bills. He had 174 career tackles and played in the NFL until 2010. Sky Moore was a 4-star linebacker out of South Florida who South Carolina flipped from Rutgers. And he's the only player in my recollection to lead the team in tackles all 4 years he played. Now, he played his first 3 years. Then he injured his neck in the weight room and had to sit out a year. And then came back and led the Gamecocks in tackles again. Okay. Co Simpson was an absolute stud. Phil Steele in 2013 earned a spot on the coach's freshman All-SEC squad, was second team freshman All-America. According to 24/7 Sports, played in all 13 games, made 4 starts and led the team with 56 tackles, a team high 4 interceptions, and recovered a fumble, 7 tackles, 1.5 tackles for loss, and a half sack in the season opener against North Carolina in 2013, 6 tackles at Georgia, intercepted a pass and recovered a fumble in the win over Clemson in 2013, and recorded 5 tackles and had 2 interceptions in the Capital One bowl win over Wisconsin. In 2014, he led the team with 93 tackles, the most by Gamecock since Jasper Brinkley's 107 tackles in 2006. Second on the team in interceptions. Again, MVP, defensive MVP of the Independence Bowl, Pharaoh, as the head ball coach referred to him. He was the offensive MVP of the Independence Bowl. He had 11 tackles in the win over Miami and was a mid-season second-team All-SEC. In 2015, he was a permanent captain, second-team All-SEC by the AP and coaches, led the team with 111 tackles. Third in the SEC, averaged 9.2 tackles per game. Led the team with 6.5 tackles for loss and 4 interceptions. Again, just a stud. Then 2016, he rehabbed and redshirted while rehabbing a surgically repaired herniated cervical disc in his upper back, and then came back in 2017 and earned first-team All-SEC honors by the league's coaches. He was a second-team All-American, named permanent captain, and earned that distinction for the second time in his career. Became just the 15th player in Division I history to lead his team in tackles in 4 seasons. He tied Bo Davies' school record with 14 interceptions. I mean, the guy was just an absolute beast. He had a career high 15 tackles against Clemson that year. Recorded 13 career games with double-figure tackles. He was the comeback player of the year, the Joe Morrison Award winner as MVP of the defense, won the leadership award, the Steve Wadiak MVP award, and played in the Senior Bowl and was drafted by the Indianapolis Colts. And that year, he played in the bowl game against Michigan. The Gamecocks won that game. So what a career for both of those guys, and what a tragic mistake by Skip Holtz not bringing in. Instead, they brought in one of his a kid from Union. I believe he was a linebacker, hardly ever played, and only got 2 seasons out of Coach Simpson. So that's your Nana's Porch countdown to kickoff. Now let's get into your Nana's Porch news, notes, and headlines. Dawn Staley has offered her first in-state prospect for the 2025 season, offering Heathwood Hall guard Lauren Jacobs. She's 5'9". She averaged 31.5 points per game at Heathwood Hall. She is a big-time scorer. She's played on the varsity since she was a 7th grader at Heathwood Hall. She also has offers from Virginia Tech, Florida, Georgia, Mississippi State, Clemson, Ole Miss, Penn State, Wake Forest, Marquette, and others. Her coach, Brianna Dickerson, played for the Gamecocks as a junior. Jacobs was one of the top scoring players in the state, as I said, averaging 31.5 points, 7 rebounds, 4.2 steals, and 2.1 assists, helping Heathwood Hall, which, by the way, was home to Asia Wilson, to their second straight SCISA 4A state championship. She's closing in on 2,000 career points for the Highlanders, where once upon a time, yours truly was the head coach and coached probably the greatest men's player in the history of Heathwood Hall. Derek Jackson, who went on to be a 4-year starter at the University of Maine. His son, Keenan Jackson, is a freshman wide receiver at NC State. And he and his family are they are my family. And so shout out to Hilda, his mom, who had a big birthday yesterday. She's my big sister. And Tommy Jackson, two of the finest people I've ever known in my life. And shout out to Natalie Jackson, Derek's younger sister, as well. All right, Shane Beamer has officially named, wait for it, Lenore Sellers as the starting quarterback. In the words of Gomer Pyle, surprise, surprise, surprise. Not really a surprise. Robbie Ashford, number 2. Davis Bevel, the former Greenville High School standout who played at Pitt and Oklahoma. He's 3rd on the depth chart, and he left Oklahoma as a scholarship player and came to Carolina as a walk-on. He was awarded a scholarship by Shane Beamer. On the injury update front, Emory Floyd has a lower leg issue that will probably keep him out of practice this week, but he should be set and ready to go for game week. Reserve right tackle Aaron Parks rolled his ankle in the scrimmage. He is doubtful for Old Dominion. Yesterday at the press conference, Shane Beamer lauded his linebacker room, led by returning all-SEC linebacker Debo Williams and Bam Martin-Scott, who may have been the best player on defense the last 3 or 4 games of the season. Beamer said they now have a healthy Mo Kaba. You add Bangali Kamara and Demetrius Knight, and I wouldn't be a bit surprised if Demetrius Knight is not a starter at middle linebacker. And you've got uber talented freshman Fred J.R. Johnson and Jaron Willis all in that room. He called freshman wide receiver Mazio Bennett a gamer. I think it's possible South Carolina has at least three true freshmen in the starting lineup against Old Dominion. Left tackle Josiah Thompson. I can't rule out Dylan Stewart getting the start, and Mazio Bennett at wide receiver. One note from courtesy from the Big Spur, courtesy of our good friend Hale McGranahan. We want to give credit where credit is due. Travian Robertson and the Gamecocks have offered another 2025 defensive tackle, 3-star Braxton Kyle, 6'3", 320 from North Gwinnett High School in Swanee, Georgia. I believe that's the same high school as former Gamecock and NFL great tight end Jared Cook. He's been committed to Rutgers since May 31st, but has gotten offers from Texas Tech, North Carolina, Texas, and even Georgia. But Georgia may be offering him just to get him on for a visit, even though it's an in-state guy, because Georgia produces so many guys. When they offer an in-state kid, it's not the same as when South Carolina and Clemson offer an in-state kid. But I'm still wondering, why are we waiting until after Texas and Georgia offer a kid from Georgia before we offer them, especially at a position where we ain't exactly lighting it up? All right, that's my rant for the day. And it appears the Gamecocks will be losing a player. It appears that former Louisville wide receiver Amari Huggins-Bruce, who wanted to come home, wanted to play for the in-state school. That was not an option for him out of high school. A guy who had been productive at Louisville and accepted a scholarship offer from the Gamecocks, came in January, worked hard in the spring, worked hard in the summer and fall camp, but he's not even projected to be on the 3 deep, so it appears since he's a graduate transfer, he will go back to Louisville. And, Vandrevius Jacobs, Mazeo Bennett, and Jared Brown, Gage Larvadane, when he gets 100%, Delvon Campbell, Tyshawn Russell, Luke Doty, Nicholas Harbor, all those guys were ahead of him. And so I can't fault the young man. Thanks for wanting to come home to play for the Gamecocks, and best of luck back at Louisville, and just go beat Clemson. Okay. And finally, betonline.ag has released their odds for who will be the first head college football coach to be fired this year. And the odds-on favorite is Sunbelt Billy Napier, coming in at 4-1. And it's interesting, Mario Cristobal is third. He comes in at 6-1. They meet in the season opener on August the 31st in Gainesville, Miami, and the Gators. The Pitball, Sam Pittman, coming in at 5-1. Okay, Dave Aranda at Baylor, 7-1. Clark Lee, who I believe is 2-22 in the SEC, he comes in at 8-1. Ryan Day from Ohio State, 12-1. Neil Brown and Scott Satterfield, 14-1. Mike Loxley and Shane Beamer at 16-1. And then they got Dabo and Lincoln Riley at 25-1. Brent Venables 33-1, and Dion at 50-1. I think Lincoln Riley, Brent Venables, and Deion Sanders are in much greater jeopardy than some of these other guys. So that's it. Before we get to our interview, I want to recommend everybody to hit the subscribe button. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, subscribe, hit the like button, give us a 5-star review if you like it. Also, now's a great time to join our growing Gamecock family by becoming a monthly or annual VIP subscriber. You get this podcast every single day, Monday through Friday. And you get the Garnet and Black Town Hall every Tuesday night. Okay, it's like going down to your favorite sports bar and hanging out with up to 100 of your favorite Gamecocks and friends. It's one of the things that brings us all together, that we all agree on and that we all love the most, and that's Gamecock sports. We talk not just Gamecock football, basketball, women's basketball, baseball, other women's sports. Nobody will do as good a job covering Gamecock women's basketball as yours truly on this podcast. You'll get to listen to great guests like Brad Crawford, who's coming on in just a few minutes from 24/7 Sports. We're working on setting up a time when we can get together with Michael W. Bratton, the host of that SEC podcast, Jordan Kay and Peyton Titus from Go Gamecocks and the State, Hale McGranahan, John Whittle, and Alex Jones from the BigSpur.com. My good friend Mike Uva, still at Gamecock Central now, holding down the weekend news anchor desk for the CBS affiliate in Providence, Rhode Island, and many, many others. You'll also get the Morning After podcast, which will be every Sunday morning during college football season. We'll even have one for week 0. Okay, and Gamecocks have 2 open dates. This year you'll still get one because guess what? The SEC's playing, the country's playing. We're talking about it. The most interesting things, maybe the best and worst thing we saw, bad beats, crazy games. We run it all down, and particularly on Sunday mornings after the Gamecocks play, you get my immediate and rapid reaction to the game. So follow the show on Twitter at Gamecock Pod. Follow me on Twitter at KAllsep. Go to the top of the homepage, click the link. You can sign up. It's easy. You'll love it. I guarantee it. And it's still about the cost of one trip to Starbucks per month to be a monthly VIP. If you sign up to be an annual VIP member, you get 10% off. So I know the landscape's changing, but this is a labor of love for me. And this is the first time since I guess 2020, when we went to tiers, that we've had to raise costs, mainly because Apple is charging Patreon an outrageous fee for all Apple or all people that use Patreon with the Apple operating system. So at any rate, let's go to my interview with Brad Crawford from 24/7 Sports. If you got questions, hop in the Nana's Porch chat box. I'll answer all of them. Here is my interview with Brad Crawford. All right, hang on for just a second. I got to pop out here. All right, and we welcome back in to Gamecock Pod Live our good friend, Brad Crawford, the national college football writer and analyst for 24/7 Sports. Brad, can you believe we're just 10 days away from South Carolina kicking it off? And last Saturday will be the last Saturday without college football until probably sometime in January.
Finally, man. And sadly, the next 4 months will fly by.
Yes, they will.
All college football fans know that the summer off season in spring is, been torture with no football. But these next 14 or so weekends are going to fly. So I'm going to try to savor them.
No doubt about it. I mean, we say it every year. We're counting down the days. We've been counting down the days with a player or two for every day. Course number 14, Connor Shaw. 13, who do I have? I had Savell Newton and Shi Smith.
Yeah.
At number 12, two guys you probably didn't get to see play in person or on TV. Tommy Suggs, who is still the only South Carolina quarterback with a conference championship. And then right after him, Jeff Grants. That was the night I fell in love with Carolina football. His first game in 1973 against Georgia Tech. On my way back from McAllister Square in Greenville, where there was this novel new chicken restaurant inside the mall. They just served chicken sandwiches with pickles on them.
That sounds good.
Yeah, Chick-fil-A.
Oh,
And,
wow.
We got in the car. My dad was trying to find the game. I heard the golden voice of the Gamecocks, Bob Fulton, and he kept calling out this guy named Grants, who was a 5'10" sophomore from Bel Air, Maryland. And not only was Grants a great football player, he was instrumental in South Carolina's baseball team making a College World Series. So those guys were number 12, number 11, Pharaoh Cooper and Kenny McKinley. I knew Kenny McKinley personally. Never met a kid with a bigger smile or a sweeter spirit than him. And then today, I guess the last guy to lead the Gamecocks in tackles 4 straight years, and that's Sky Moore at number 10. So we've been counting them down. We started with Big George at 38 and worked our way down.
And Sky Moore's down there from Central Florida. I think he's from Orlando or Tampa, one of those areas.
No, Miami, down in the Miami.
Okay. Yeah. And Jeff Grants, my dad told me a lot of stories about Jeff Grants. My dad's a 1977 graduate of South Carolina. So right before he started at Carolina was, Grants' heyday. And, of course, he watched him on TV growing up in Palmetto State. But, yeah, that's some good names you got there, man.
Yeah, no doubt. And, of course, Grant's most famously known for throwing 5 touchdowns against Clemson in the 56-20 win in 1975. And he actually threw another one to Jay Saudi, who was tight end, who wound up playing for the Dallas Cowboys. It was on 4th down, and that was Jim Carlin's first year, and he was sending a message. Paul Dietzel had been fired or retired in 74. Jim Carlin came from Texas Tech, and they opened up the offense. And Grants had his best year, led if he hadn't have been injured, South Carolina probably wins 9 games that year. But, yeah, and I think he ran for the other 3 touchdowns in that Clemson game. He accounted for all 8 scores, and it would have been 9, but they called Saudi for offensive interference on 4th down. So it was turnover on loss of downs. So, man, how's your summer been? How was Dallas for SEC Media Days? That kind of had to be outside the box.
It's been great, man. We're celebrating little Allison's first birthday on September 1st. She was born just before halftime of the UNC Carolina opener last year. A game to forget for me, but the hospital stay was fun because I had a baby to talk about. But off season has been filled with pickleball. I play probably 5 times a week.
Oh, wow.
I've gotten pretty good, man. And now I'm just, I'm in complete work mode, kind of SEC Media Days. Kicked it off for me. I'm kind of anxious to see what this Gamecock team is going to look like. A lot of folks, including myself, have it around a 5 or 6 win team, but maybe they surprise. Talking to folks this week close to the program, they are really excited about the talent returning on defense, and the offense right now is kind of a wait and see mode. So, Old Dominion here in about 10 days. I'm looking forward to it.
No doubt. So, I want to kind of save your schedule game by game for last.
Yeah.
And so first, I mean, look, the SEC is a line of scrimmage league, right? We know
Sure.
Will Muschamp said it, Spurrier. I mean, every coach has said it, and it's a fact. I mean, that's really the separator for the SEC. And so to me, through the transfer portal and recruiting, I think South Carolina's biggest improvements this year should be on the offensive and defensive lines. You talked about the defense, and I mean, we can start there. I mean, you look at last year, I mean, you had Jordan Strong playing on one leg, and then Tyreek Johnson, and then 230-pound Brian Thomas Jr. That's, and Tyreek Johnson, who was in like his 7th year because he'd missed 4 years with injuries. But certainly that's not the case this year. And I know, you have sources, my sources, these edge guys have been very difficult to block, led by Kyle Kennard, Gilbert Edmond, and Dylan Stewart.
Yeah.
I can't rule out starting. I know 24/7 Sports has Dylan Stewart and Josiah Thompson both as freshman All-American, and I don't really think it'd be a surprise to anybody inside the program and people that follow the program closely outside if both of those guys are not starters on game one. But Brad, I look at that edge room, there's 6 or 7 guys. You have talented freshmen. You've got older guys in Kyle Kennard, Gilbert Edmond coming back, Elijah Davis down from 280 to 255.
Yeah.
As well as others. And then you got 6 defensive tackles who are all 4th, 5th, or 6th year guys. And you got 2 guys out of the transfer portal, Monkel Goodwine and DeAndre Jules. And then that trio of Tonka Hemingway, Boogie Huntley, and TJ Sanders. I mean, a lot of talent up front for the Gamecocks.
The good news is there's depth within that front 7 defensively, and that's something the Gamecocks have not had in recent years. You mentioned Edmond coming back from Florida State. You've got Kennard, a transfer, DeAndre Jules, a transfer, who's probably not going to start at one of those tackle spots, but obviously he's going to get a lot of reps. Alex Huntley and Tonka Hemingway is a guy, Keith, that a lot of NFL scouts this offseason have told me they feel is their best NFL prospect for the 2025 draft. Now, we haven't seen Tonka fully put it together from season opener to regular season finale, but, possibly this season, that's when it happens. But, I think some of the positive reports coming out of the first 2 scrimmages of the fall camp with the D-line maybe has more to do with the offensive line struggles than it does with D-line playing well. But that being said, I think Old Dominion is a good matchup for this D-line to start. And we're going to really know if the pass rush has improved week 2 at Kentucky, because they go 4 seniors deep along that offensive front. And then on the other side of the ball, they got Deion Walker, who is probably a first-round pick. So that first SEC game, man, is going to show us all we need to know about South Carolina in the trenches this season.
I mean, to me, that's a game I have circled. I'm sure Shane Beamer still has it circled from the, silly pair of sunglasses comment. South Carolina has beaten Kentucky 2 years in a row. So back to the offensive line. I mean, South Carolina, Lonnie Teasley has recruited well.
Yeah.
Last year they were devastated by injuries at the tackle position. They really, fortified the offensive line. You got, Josiah Thompson, who may be a starter in place of Tree Babalade, who was all SEC freshman, stepped in and started the last, 8 or 9 games of the season. I think he was thrown in that first week against Georgia, didn't give up a sack or a pressure. But they fortified the interior with some transfers with Kamar Bell, who was at Auburn, Then at Florida Atlantic, Torricelli Simpkins, who may beat out Trevon Ball at right guard and will most certainly be the backup center behind Vershawn Lee.
Yeah, it sure sounds like it. I mean, Simpkins, he was a 3-year starter at Central here in North Carolina, and he was recruited originally by Teasley, so obviously Teasley knows a good bit about him. You mentioned those guards, man. There's a good chance that, like you said, Simpkins and Bell both start. And probably Vershawn Lee at center, he's a veteran guy too. Case and Henry's likely the right tackle starter. So, I mean, there's some solid players along the offensive line. I'm excited to see Thompson, though. I called back in the spring that I really felt if there was a 5-star in this class who would start in the SEC from day one, it would be Thompson. And, dang if he hasn't probably solidified that left tackle spot over Big Tree, which says a lot about Thompson and just – coming to Carolina physically ready to play SEC football. There's some nerves, obviously, when you're starting a true freshman left tackle, and he's probably the guy, but I'm excited to see him, man. Along with Dylan Stewart, you're talking about a tackle and a bookend DM, both 5 stars, 2 guys the Gamecocks really needed.
No doubt about it. So, obviously, Spencer Rattler off to the NFL. Lenore Sellers, speaking with a source inside the program late last week, he just said, Lenoris is that guy. I mean, I think there is a high level of confidence, but he is a freshman. He will be making his first SEC start in week 2 on the road in Lexington, Kentucky. But what do you think the offense looks like for Dalla Loggins now with Lenore Sellers, completely revamped running back room headlined by Rocket Sanders, who I think is as good a back as there is in the country, and he's healthy, and what should be a much improved offensive line?
Yeah, you would think, Keith, that this year's offense changes its philosophical approach a little bit and goes more RPO heavy with a guy that's 245 pounds like Lenoris, a bell cow back like Rocket Sanders, and then, Oscar Attaway behind him, who was a pretty darn good back too as a pass catcher out of the backfield. So you're talking about 3 new featured threats in this offense, 2 from the portal, and obviously Lenoris is a guy that they signed, the flip from Syracuse. And, I mean, the coaching staff, like you said, everybody I've spoke to loves Lenoris. I think the reason Shane Beamer hasn't officially announced him as the guy for week 1, although he did back in the spring pretty much say he was QB1, I think the reason is, you want to keep Robbie Ashford, the Auburn transfer, mentally prepared to also play. And it's very important that the Gamecocks have a quality backup quarterback because Lenoris is going to be running the ball, taking some hits, and Robbie seems like the kind of guy that's sort of like Lenoris. He's a dual threat. He's a better runner right now than he is passer. So I think we're going to see an offense that gets back to smash mouth football. When the Gamecocks play their best football, man, they're really good on defense, and they get 5.5 yards to carry and can move the chains and kind of eat some clock. So the biggest question for me offensively is the wide receiver position. I don't think that right now a true wide receiver 1 has emerged. I was told by somebody on staff the other day that the second scrimmage was heavy passing by design because they wanted to see which receivers stepped up, made catches, didn't have drops, ran the right route. So that's an area that I think Mike Furry, the new wide receivers coach, he's going to know the first couple of games, what that 3 to 5 player rotation looks like at wide receiver. Some of the returns on, Nick Harbor right now are still kind of skeptical. He's a guy that had 12 to 15 catches last year. He should double that this fall, but, he did miss a lot of practice with the track team. So he's a guy that I think certainly has that 5-star talent, but are we going to see it? I don't know yet.
I mean, I brought that up as well. I mean, you can't go for 7 months basically without touching a football when you're not a natural pass catcher, right, and then come in 6 weeks or 8 weeks and be ready to roll. results have been mixed. I do know he's had 2 big drop passes that would have been long touchdowns. He also made a couple of tough catches on Saturday. And I think that rotation may look different in October than it does in September.
I agree.
But I think, Brad, the talent at tight end, along with the running backs, I think the tight ends can be a security blanket for Lenore Sellers, because I thought Joshua Simon was by far the best tight end on the roster last year. Brady Hunt comes in from Ball State. He put up huge numbers 2 years ago. Last year, he missed the season with ankle surgery. But a guy that's being talked about really in the same breath as Josiah Thompson and Dylan Stewart to me is Michael Smith. 6'6", 255. I mean, he runs like a wide receiver in a tight end's body. And I think collectively, those guys could really be the security blanket until the receivers figure it out for Dow Loggins and Lenore Sellers in this offense.
Yeah, there's a reason Michael Smith had a plethora of offers from, national championship contenders. I mean, more than just Gamecock staff saw his raw ability, and he's obviously shown that here during fall camp. Going back to Josh Simon for a second, I talked to a source today. I told him that would it surprise anybody if Josh Simon was the leading pass catcher on this team? And he said, Brad, he might be the best player on this team. And I mean, that's high praise for a tight end. So if I'm Lenore Sellers, man, obviously he's been one of the most consistent players over these first 2 scrimmages, played well during the spring. I am looking for him on 3rd and 6 when I need a quality play over the middle. Josh Simon didn't get as much burn last year because Trey Knox was on the team as well, but he's going to be a guy that has a chance to be a first or second all-SEC type player if this offense is as good as we think it is. And in this RPO heavy set, I mean, there's going to be chances for tight ends to make plays, especially in the red zone. I think Josh Simon's a guy who could certainly lead this team in catches and touchdowns.
I mean, I could see it. I hear a lot of great things about Michael Smith. I mean, I don't know how much 2 wide tight end sets we'll see. I think it may be not as heavy in week 1, but maybe more so in week 2 at Lexington. But if Joshua Simon's a better football player than Rocket Sanders, South Carolina definitely has a major weapon on offense. So at wide receiver, I mean, Nick Harbor's been number 1 on Bruce Feldman's freak list. We're all hoping it shows up on the field. My sources kind of indicate probably the top 3 right now would be FSU transfer Vandrevius Jacobs, who is supremely talented, and then Mazeo Bennett or Jared Brown, maybe both of them. Then it could be Dale Von Campbell, Luke Doty, and Gage Larvadane. Probably right now are your top 6. But they got to get Harbor out there because the defense has to account for that speed. I mean, it's going to be an interesting September for sure.
No, I think it will be, man. I mentioned on the Gamecocks pod the other day that, I think the rotation at wide receiver against Old Dominion is going to look different against UK. It's going to look different in the SEC home opener against LSU. We're not going to know really till probably week 4 or 5 who the 3 most consistent wide receivers are on this team. I mean, Tyshawn Russell had a great first week of fall camp, and then I haven't heard a whole lot from him since. He's a guy who could probably perform really well in the slot. I mean, he's one of the fastest players. We heard Robbie Ashford, the Auburn transfer quarterback, say this is the best group of receivers he's been around. Well, he's been around a group at Oregon. He's been around Auburn. That's 2 pretty good schools at the wideout spot. So that's high praise. But yeah, there's a lot of, you still have to show me. Gamecocks went so portal heavy at receiver, all we have to go by is how those guys performed at other lower level classifications outside the Florida State guy. But it all depends, man, if Lenore Sellers has time or not, if Rocket Sanders is the running back that we all think he is. If the Gamecocks can run the football and Lenore Sellers has time, these wideouts are going to make plays. But if you get in third and long situations and the first ball over the middle is a dime from Lenore and it's dropped, that's when confidence starts being shaken. So, there's a reason the Gamecocks have a new wide receivers coach. They have to develop better at that position outside of Leggett last season. So that's the biggest question on this year's team. Who's going to step up at wide receiver, and is Nick Harbor going to be an impact player at Carolina? We may never know that.
I agree. I mean, I have thoughts, but I know our time's limited. So I want to get back to this defense because they just don't have depth up front for the first time in years. This linebacker group could really be 2 to 3 deep across the board, bringing in, returning an all-SEC guy in Debo Williams, a guy in Bam Martin Scott, who when they went to the 3-3-5 may have been the best player on defense down the stretch last year. By the way, I heard he wreaked havoc on Saturday in that scrimmage. But then you add 2 transfers in Demetrius Knight and Vangeli Kamara, a teammate of Jules at Pitt. And you've got talented freshmen in Fred J.R. Johnson and Wendell Gregory, who's probably playing more of that outside spot along with Bam Martin Scott. And Jaron Willis, who was an ESPN top 115 player. He flashed towards the end of the season. And Mokaba made a statement last week in his player availability. He said, look, I'm coming to get my spot back. I got 3 years of eligibility left because of injuries. I'm almost 100%. I mean, whatever you can get out of him to me is a huge bonus, but he looks like $1 million, and with his resolve and resilience, I can't count him out of the equation this year.
I think you're right. They go at least 5 deep at this position. I know the coaching staff is cautiously optimistic that if Debo Williams and Bam Martin Scott stay healthy, I mean, that's 2 pretty premier SEC linebackers. Debo's had some issues in the past with, missing tackles, but I think second half last year played really well. You mentioned, too, that Martin Scott, I mean, he's had one of the best off seasons of anybody on the team at any position. I think he might be this team's best linebacker, at that spot. We're going to see in a few weeks here in September how that pans out. But the 2 big transfers, Demetrius Knight from Charlotte, and you've got Kamara. Those 2 guys are going to play. Knight had a big play in the spring game. He's going to be used off the edge, I think, too, as a pass rusher of sorts. He's kind of long and lean, which is what you want at the linebacker spot now in the SEC with, so many pass-heavy offenses. So linebacker has been a position of weakness at Carolina for the last few seasons, but I think this year that's probably the best spot on defense. Outside of edge rusher, I think linebacker is going to be a productive position. And that front 7, man, you've already mentioned several of the names, but I do think Debo, Bam Martin Scott, Dylan Stewart, the Gamecocks are going to look pretty good getting off the bus, and we hadn't been able to say that in a few years on defense.
No doubt about it. So, I mean, O'Donnell Fortune is set to start at 1 corner.
Yeah.
I think,
he can play better than he has.
He's got to play better than he has. If not, hopefully David Spalding can stay healthy and push him, or maybe Vakari Swain if Judge Collier has that corner locked down. I mean, I'm really looking at that, and I'm also looking for perhaps the emergence of Jalewis Solomon. I know they've got him at nickel right now, but I know this staff is probably much higher on his ability than the recruiting services who had him as a low 4-star guy. But you got 3 former freshman All-Americans at nickel and safety, Jalen Kilgore, DQ Smith, and Nick Eamon-Worry. You got Gerald Kilgore, the big brother of Jalen, who's going to be in that safety rotation along with Peyton Williams and maybe an unheralded freshman in David Busey, who I think is probably going to contribute on special teams, but he might work his way on the field. And honestly, in the secondary, the more the merrier, because guys were gassed at linebacker playing 88 snaps at corner, not coming off the field. You get in the fourth quarter of these SEC games, these guys are gassed. They're just not going to be able to make plays.
Yeah, and we saw last season, Keith, some not so good SEC teams, namely Mississippi State and Florida, really pick on both the Carolina safeties. And you mentioned Eamon-Worry and DQ Smith were former SEC All-Americans as freshmen, but last season they took a step back. So the safety spot for me has to be a position of consistency, because I think the Gamecocks right now are better suited at the back end of the secondary than they are on both corners. You know, we mentioned Fortune has to play better. He had that breakout game against Notre Dame in the Gator Bowl, and then, hasn't really played at that level since. I know the staff really is trying to get him to be a more consistent cornerback. Vakari Swain's a name that has appeared in every text message that I've gotten when I've asked about, cornerback play in the secondary. He's going to play a lot. Not sure if he's going to start, but he has a great chance to. I mean, the cornerback spot to me is kind of like wide receiver. They're going to kind of plug and play guys, see who really steps up and, sticks their face in the fan defensively and plays well. But safety is a position that's got to be more consistent. And then I think nickel is going to be really good with Jalen Kilgore and his brother. And then Emory Floyd, we haven't mentioned him either. He's a guy who can, play well at times. And it's just all about consistency with that secondary, because if the pass rush is as good as everybody says it's going to be in Columbia, that's going to, work out well for the back end of that defense.
No doubt. So I will say this. I thought the biggest problem with Eamon-Worry and Smith was when Clayton White had them play a nickel.
Yep.
And neither one of those guys are nickels. And I was at the Mississippi State game, and, man, they just exposed DQ Smith, and there was no adjustment.
Yeah.
And,
more of a coaching issue than talent issue, yeah.
No doubt. And, I mean, I was kind of surprised Clayton White got another year. But
I was too.
Because I think you were probably hearing the same things I was hearing the week before the Kentucky game.
Hey, we knew every Gamecock insider knew 2 coaches were gone, but it was, which 2 are they? Because there was so many names.
Right, no doubt. But this year, to me, Clayton White has no excuse, because they could have gone to the portal and gotten a cornerback. They didn't do it. 2 years in a row after you lose Rush, Cam Smith, now you lose Marcellus Dial, and you really haven't been adding that many guys. And so they got to hope these young guys can really step up, and Torian Gray can squeeze blood out of a turnip with O'Donnell Fortune this year.
Yeah, and part of that signing Vakari Swain was huge. I think a lot of guys on that staff sort of circled 3 or 4 players in this 2024 cycle that would come in and play a lot of reps from day one, and Vakari Swain was one of those guys. And I remember with him, man, we weren't sure if he was going to play receiver or defensive back. And then he stepped on campus, and they're like, okay, you got to play DB because you hit hard, you can cover, and you can run. So I'm interested in seeing him this fall, especially in that opener, because I think it's good the Gamecocks are playing Old Dominion versus an NC State or an SEC game to open, because, I mean, you're throwing a lot of freshmen in the fire. And it's always better to, play a team that you're favored to beat by 3 touchdowns rather than road game or neutral site game like we saw backfire last season.
No doubt. So I know we're getting in up against it, but I did want to ask you, because to me, everybody talks about all these other positions, but South Carolina, a few years ago, you had Parker White, who kicked for 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Then you had Jeter, who had been the kickoff guy in 2 seasons, was 23 of 25, and both those misses were well over 50-yard attempts. And we all know the margin for winning and losing, how thin it can be. It can be one drop pass, one missed kick could be the difference between 8-4 and 4-8.
Yeah.
Really. And so Alex Herrera is a 6th-year guy. He's never kicked a field goal. I know at some point you got to think they'll just run him out there against Old Dominion so he'll kick one before you go to Lexington.
I think the Gamecocks, I mean, I was kind of asked a few weeks ago if there's position of weakness, where is it? And obviously it's special teams. There's so many guys out there outside of Kai Kroger that we don't really know about, just complete mysteries. I think Shane Beamer, Keith, is going to need to coach slightly differently on 4th and short type situations this year. I mean, if Gamecocks are setting up for a 48-yarder, then the analytics say go ahead and go for it, and let's see what happens. And you mentioned the margin being so small in the SEC between getting to bowl eligibility or losing your job with a 4-8 finish. I mean, Shane's not going to lose his job if he goes for it and appeases fans, because all of us on the plus side of 50 want to see teams go for it. Lane Kiffin does it all the time. He led college football last season in 4th down conversions and 4th down attempts, and he won 11 games. So, he's has a top 5 team now too with the Rebels who come to Columbia in September. So that should be exciting. But I don't know. I'm not going to really be too happy if I see this Gamecock team this season set up for a bunch of field goals, because in the SEC you have to score points, and this is an offense that probably is not going to be of the quick strike variety. So staying on the field, churning drive, you never want to see a 15-play drive end in 3 points, All
right, so I've asked a lot of people this, so I'm going to ask you. So South Carolina is down 21-20. They had a bad snap on a PAT. They got the ball 4th and 5 at the Kentucky 30-yard line with 19 seconds and no timeouts. If you're Shane Beamer, what are you going to do? What are you going to do?
Well, so I'm probably throwing an out to my favorite receiver and hoping we get an 8-yard gain, and then you set up for something a little more manageable. But I mean, they have to identify who that guy is, and you got to have blocking from your left tackle. You got to have the execution on the outside, and by the way, you can't throw at Kentucky's 5th-year senior who led the SEC in picks last year. I mean, that's a great question, man. But road game with a iffy kicking game, I'm not sure if I would leave it in a kicker's hands late in that ball game.
I think I'm running a crossing route with 2 tight ends, the old Spurrier play, and hope
that works.
Throw it to Michael Smith and see how far he can run with it.
Yeah, that works.
All right, so Brad, you got the Gamecocks going 6-6. You got wins over Old Dominion, losing at Kentucky, and then knocking off number 13 LSU at home the next week.
Yeah.
Beating Akron, going into the open date, 3-1. Then dropping all 3 games prior to the second open date, which would be number 6 Ole Miss in Columbia, at number 5 Alabama, and at number 16 Oklahoma. I think that I'm putting Brent Venables on upset alert that week. They lost 30-something guys, the portal, and their starting quarterback.
They did.
Then you got South Carolina beating Texas A&M at home on November 2nd. I agree with that. Vanderbilt, Missouri. I mean, at some point, doesn't Shane Beamer have to beat Eli Drinkowitz? I mean,
you would think so. And this year it sets up well when they lost, 6 starters defensively and the games at Williams-Brice. But I think it would be better, Keith, if Missouri was maybe the first SEC game versus playing them in November, because last year Missouri was a much better team late in the year when the Gamecocks played them than they were early.
No doubt. And so then you got getting bowl eligible win 6 against Wofford and then a loss at Death Valley, although I don't think I'm willing to concede that with the quarterback issues, and Clemson loses players every year and they don't replace any in the portal. And
what is Dabo doing with his recruiting philosophy right now? I don't understand it.
I don't either. I don't think a lot of people understand it. I mean, I know from speaking to some people, they don't think he'll coach that much longer.
Yeah, I don't think he will either. Yeah, I'm with you, because he sort of has one foot out the door the way Nick Saban did last season. And Nick, after he lost to Michigan in that semifinal game, and he said this publicly. He said, I had like 30 players come to me and ask for more money. He said, that's when I knew I'm done. And Dabo has said ad nauseum this offseason that he's tired of talking about NIL, paying players, transfer portal. He just wants to recruit high school guys and develop them. Well, that's like stubborn old ball coach stuff. That's so 5 years ago. And if you don't get it, if you don't change your philosophy, man, and adjust to the times like every other, hot shot coach has done, the game passes you by.
No doubt. All right, so Brad, if I were to ask you the games you picked South Carolina to lose, I mean, obviously LSU would be a major upset. I could see that one going the other way. What are you think maybe the 2 best opportunities for pickups in the games that you picked South Carolina to lose?
Yeah, I've got the Gamecocks going 1-1 in that opening 2-game set against Kentucky and LSU, and I don't really know the combination there, but I think to get to bowl eligibility, they have to go 1-1 at worst against Kentucky and LSU. And I think LSU on paper is a better matchup solely because the game's at Williams-Brice. It's the first road start for Garrett Nussmeier and a host of new LSU starters. And the fact that Lenora Sellers is going to already have 2 starts under his belt, including a road SEC game. And 2 years ago when the Gamecocks went to Lexington and won that game and snapped that streak against Kentucky, they also played Kentucky's 3rd-string quarterback that Saturday. I don't know if they're going to get the luxury of doing that again. I mean, Brock Vandegrift, the Georgia transfer, people like him a lot in the Bluegrass. I've got Kentucky going 7-5 this season. Kentucky fans, Keith, are viewing that Gamecock home game as a must-win. And I would too if I pull for Kentucky because, Gamecocks coming in, a lot of new starters, 5.5-win team, according to odds makers. You got to win that game if you're Kentucky. So Stoops back-to-back losses to South Carolina. That's going to mean something to him too. I got this feeling that the Gamecocks are going to beat a ranked team this year, and I think it happens against LSU.
All right, so I kind of like Kentucky as a pickup.
Yeah.
And then for me, it's probably because they're at home, even though I am putting Oklahoma on upset alert, is either maybe Missouri and then at Clemson. I just think most of my life, South Carolina's won more games at Death Valley than they've won at Williams-Brice Stadium. But
I got a question for you.
Far between.
Is there any chance that the game against Vanderbilt is like worrisome this season. Because there's like 16 straight wins against Vandy, but you know the streak is going to end at some point. Maybe not this year, but
maybe not this year. I mean, Clark Lee, I still think he's looking for his first SEC win. So
crazy, right? Yeah, he's I think let's see, he went 0-8, 2-6, and 0-8. So he's 2-22 against SEC teams. Man, that's rough.
That is rough. Well, Brad, I can't thank you enough. So, final question. Give me the two teams that play for the SEC championship, and then maybe one team that could come out of nowhere that the pundits are not discussing in the SEC this year.
So the entire offseason, I've had Georgia, Texas, and Atlanta, but Texas has had so many injuries during camp. I'm backing off the Longhorns. They're still a playoff team, but I think Georgia, Ole Miss are going to get to Atlanta. I think Ole Miss beats Georgia in the regular season. Georgia wins the rematch. Both them teams are in the playoff. And the one playoff dark horse I really think the schedule sets up for Tennessee to win 10 games this season.
Wow.
If Tennessee can beat NC State and Charlotte and then win at Oklahoma in September, then two of their four toughest games are behind them. Then they got Bama at home, Georgia on the road. You split those, you're 11-1, you're inside the top five. So Vols are a team. They're very thin on defense. They don't play South Carolina this year either. But I think I'm a believer in Nico, their new quarterback, and Josh Heupel, pretty darn good coach. So Tennessee's a team right now outside the top 10 that not enough folks are talking about.
All right. Well, Brad, great stuff as always. I still say don't count out Bama. Kalen DeBoer, I thought should have been the first phone call. I've been extremely high on him since he was at Indiana as offensive coordinator.
Yeah, you called it early. I remember talking to you when he got the Washington job, and you were saying what a good coach he was.
I mean, I just think it's a matter of time, and it's really going to be weird not seeing Nick Saban gesturing, being in his offensive coordinator's ear and on the sideline. But, man, it's easy to see why that dude was the number one recruiter in the country when you saw him on the set at SEC Media Days all week.
Oh, man. He was prepared for NFL draft coverage, media day. He's going to be a guest on, game day every week. So we're going to still see a lot of Nick Saban. But, like you said, it's DeBoer's program now, a completely different philosophy. There's no cussing. There's no screaming at assistants. So we're gonna see if the nice guy mentality actually wins big in Tuscaloosa here pretty soon.
Yeah, well, Clemson claims to do that as well, but I think
I've heard Dabo Sweeney cuss before. Yeah.
Brad, have a great rest of the week. College football's here. Let's drink it all in and savor it because, like you said, it'll be gone before we know it. Be well, my friend, and we'll look forward to hopefully catching up with you down the road.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Keith. Hopefully, man, we can get together and tailgate at a game here pretty soon. They've got about 7 home dates, so I need to pick one out.
That's right. All right, Brad. Take care. Man. Thanks again. All right, that was Brad Crawford, national college football writer for 24/7 Sports, and an in-depth conversation on Gamecock football. And like I said, I'm optimistic because the SEC is a line of scrimmage league, and South Carolina has players. They have older players. You look at Kamar Bell is a 6th-year player. Rashawn Lee is I believe is a 5th-year player. Torricelli Simpkins is a 5th-year player. Ja'Kai Moore is a fifth or sixth year player on that offensive line. And then you got Trevon Ball. You've got Marquis Anderson, who's healthy now. You got Big Tree Babalade. Kason Henry is healthy and starting at right tackle opposite Josiah Thompson. And really, it's not about Big Tree not being any good. It's about how elite Josiah Thompson is. I mean, he came in at 265. He eats 8 meals a day. The strength and nutrition staff had done a phenomenal job with him. And then we broke down, you got like 7 or 8 edge guys. You got 6 defensive tackles. You got 6 linebackers that you can play, maybe more. You've got quality depth at safety with Gerald Kilgore coming in, with Peyton Williams being healthy. You know, with if you start O'Donnell Fortune and Judge Collier, you've got David Spalding, you've got Bakari Swain and Emery Floyd, and you've also got Jalewis Solomon, who's playing at nickel, but I think eventually will be a corner. And if he's at corner, or you put Swain in, and you've got 3 corners in the game, then you can move DQ Smith up as your dime linebacker, and you can have Kilgore and Eamon Wari at safety. I mean, there are numbers at wide receiver and in the running back room, and there are elite tight ends. You heard Brad say, a source close to the program said, Joshua Simon is our best football player. I mean, if that dude's better than Rocket Sanders, he's in for a big year. And I've been told Michael Smith may be the most impressive weapon South Carolina has on offense. I mean, if you haven't seen the clip from Hale McGranahan from the one-on-ones after the second scrimmage, or maybe it was after the first scrimmage. Anyway, it was on a Sunday, and Michael Smith absolutely posterized Nick Eamon-Wari in the back of the end zone for a leaping catch, high pointing the ball. I mean, this guy's elite. Brady Hunt, Maurice Brown, the second, 6'3", almost 255. He's running right at 22 miles per hour on the GPS. There are players across the board that South Carolina has not had. This is the deepest roster South Carolina's had, probably going back to 2017, and then before that back to 2012, when South Carolina was clearly one of the best teams in all of college football, and their schedule was unfortunate. But I think they're even deeper at some positions. Now, maybe they don't have, Melvin Ingram and Jadeveon Clowney, but Dylan Stewart is a stud, and you just cannot count him out. If he doesn't start first game, it doesn't mean he's not going to start at some point. But, having Gilbert Edmond and Vandrevius Jacobs, who probably is wide receiver 1, coming from Florida State and having been on an undefeated team, they've got some cred, and they know what goes into it. And yes, the SEC, it is, to quote Bob Davie, it is a players, and Ellis Johnson, it's a players league. It's about the Jimmies and Joes, not always just the X's and O's. And this year, South Carolina has way more players top to bottom than they have had at any point in the Shane Beamer era. And that gives me reasons for optimism. But at the same time, you don't have a Juice Wells or a Josh Vann or Jalen Brooks at the end of their careers that they're going to catch it when you throw them the ball. Like Juice Wells, Eric Douglas made the call to get the ball to Juice Wells on that screen, and they didn't even block it. And he made 2 guys miss and got the first down all by himself. Who is going to step into that role for South Carolina? I'm interested to see that. And, 1 or 2 drop passes, like I said, a missed kick, a bad snap, a blocked extra point. All of that can be the difference between winning and losing. It is that thin and that narrow of a margin. But I think if you're a Gamecock fan, hey, we're undefeated. We get to watch college football this Wednesday for the first, or this Saturday for the first time, week 0. Then you get, Florida State, Notre Dame in Ireland to kick it off in week 1. So I'm excited. Get excited. College football's here. Look, it's not fall camp. Okay, it's preseason camp. It's over. They're in mock game week. Next week will be game week. Today we will hear from both coordinators at South Carolina, Dowell Loggins and Clayton White, and possibly Joe DeCamillis. I'm excited to hear what they have to say. So until tomorrow, this has been Gamecock Pod Live. Special thanks to Brad Crawford. Sorry about the mix-up on the link. I don't really know what happened with that. Human error happens, but we went off. When I said we were going off on social media, hopefully everybody got to tune in. If not, you can catch it anytime on YouTube, on Apple Podcasts, and on Spotify. So until next week, when it will be game week, this has been episode number 1550 of Gamecock Pod Live and Gamecock Pod Daily. I am Keith Alsep, and I am so grateful to everyone who listens and watches this show, and all my ride or die patrons that have been there since day one. Here's a health to you, Carolina, and to all my patrons. God bless. Go Gamecocks. And we'll be back next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. Until then, I'm out of here. Go Gamecocks, everybody.